Steven Seagal walked into a glass building that carried his name on paper, but not on the wall. No cameras followed him. No assistants rushed behind him. No luxury suit announced his wealth. Just a calm man, wearing simple clothes, walking with quiet confidence. Inside, the company buzzed with power. Employees hurried past. Executives laughed loudly. Security guards stood tall, proud of the authority in their uniforms. Steven stepped forward. Before he could take 3 steps, "Hey!" A sharp voice cut through the lobby. Security. One guard blocked his path, eyes scanning him from head to toe. Not curiosity, judgment. "This area is restricted," the guard snapped. "Employees only." Steven stopped calmly. "I'm here for a meeting," he said. The guard laughed. "With who?" "The janitor?" A few people nearby chuckled. Others looked away, pretending not to see. Steven remained silent. Silence irritated them. "You don't look like management," the guard continued, "and you definitely don't belong here." Steven glanced around. The walls, the desks, the logo, everything here existed because of him, but no one knew that. Another guard joined in. "Sir, don't make this difficult. Leave before we escort you out." Escort. The word echoed. Steven didn't argue, didn't raise his voice, didn't pull out a card or phone. He simply said, "I built this company." Laughter. Real laughter. One guard shook his head. "Yeah, and I own the city." More smiles, more confidence, because when power thinks it's safe, it becomes cruel. Steven stood there, being told to leave the place he created, by people who wouldn't have jobs if he hadn't taken a risk years ago. A receptionist whispered to another employee, "Why is he still standing here?" The guard stepped closer. "Last warning," one said. "Out, now." Steven slowly turned toward the exit, not defeated, not angry, just calm. And that calmness was dangerous, and because moments like this always come right before the truth explodes, what they didn't know. This wasn't a mistake, this was a test, and every single one of them was about to fail it. Monday mornings at Seagal Industries were always the same. Busy, loud, self-important. The glass building reflected the city skyline like a crown, a symbol of success, authority, and money. Inside, employees rushed through the lobby with coffee cups and forced smiles, pretending urgency was the same thing as importance. This company had grown fast, too fast, and when companies grow faster than values, something dangerous fills the gap: ego. At the center of that ego stood Mark Reynolds, the newly promoted operations director. Mid-40s, expensive suit, loud confidence, the kind of man who believed titles made him powerful, not responsibility. He walked through the lobby like it belonged to him. "Move faster," he barked at an intern. "If you can't keep up, someone else will." The intern nodded nervously and stepped aside. Mark didn't notice Steven standing near the entrance, or maybe he did, and decided Steven wasn't worth noticing. To Mark, people were categories. Executives mattered, managers mattered less. Everyone else was invisible. Steven watched quietly. He saw the fear in people's eyes. The way conversations stopped when Mark passed. The way respect here wasn't earned. It was demanded. This wasn't the company Steven had built. Years ago, Seagal Industries started in a rented office with broken chairs and second-hand desks. Steven remembered eating cold food at midnight, signing papers with shaking hands, wondering if the risk would destroy him. Back then, everyone mattered. Now power walked loudly, and humanity walked quietly. Steven moved toward the reception desk. The receptionist barely looked up. "Yes?" she asked flatly. "I'm here to see senior leadership," Steven said. She finally raised her eyes and paused, not because she recognized him, but because she didn't. Her eyes flicked to his clothes, then to his shoes, then back to his face. "Do you have an appointment?" she asked. "No," Steven replied. She sighed, already irritated. "Then you'll need to leave," she said. Executives don't meet walk-ins." Steven nodded slowly. "I understand." That calm again. It made people uncomfortable. Mark noticed now. He stepped closer, curiosity mixed with annoyance. "What's going on here?" he asked the receptionist. "This man says he wants to see leadership," she replied. "He doesn't have an appointment." Mark looked Steven up and down. Not anger, not caution, amusement. "Sir," Mark said, smiling thinly, "this is a private company?" Steven met his eyes. "I know." Mark chuckled. "No offense," he said, But people like you don't just walk in here asking for meetings. People like you. Stephen didn't react. Mark mistook silence for weakness. You should be grateful security hasn't removed you already, Mark continued. We can't have just anyone wandering in. Stephen glanced around the lobby again. Employees were watching now, pretending not to. Some felt uncomfortable, some enjoyed the show. No one intervened, because intervening costs something, and fear makes people cheap. Stephen spoke calmly. Who's responsible for company culture here? Mark laughed openly. I am, he said proudly, and I don't remember hiring you. That landed harder than Mark expected. Something about Stephen's expression didn't change. No embarrassment, no fear, just disappointment. Mark felt it and didn't like it. Security, he called out loudly. Let's move this along. 2 guards approached again. They stood straighter now, encouraged by Mark's presence. Sir, one said, you need to exit the building. Stephen looked at them, then at Mark, then at the company logo behind the desk. This company was built on respect, Stephen said quietly. Not arrogance, Mark scoffed. Spare me the lecture, he replied. This isn't a motivational seminar. The guards stepped closer. Employees looked away. Stephen took a slow breath. This wasn't about recognition anymore. This was about exposure. Because when people think no one is watching, they show you exactly who they are. And Stephen was watching closely. Every word, every look, every choice. Outside, an executive car slowed near the entrance. Inside, egos were peaking, and no one realized they were moments away from learning the most expensive lesson of their careers. The lobby felt different now. Not loud, not busy, heavy. Every movement slowed, as if the air itself was watching. Mark Reynolds stood taller than before. Authority does that to people. It convinces them they're untouchable. With executives behind closed doors and security at his side, Mark felt safe enough to be cruel. This is your final warning, he said, loud enough for the entire lobby to hear. You will leave this building immediately. Stephen didn't move. That stillness angered Mark more than shouting ever could. You hear me? Mark snapped. This isn't a debate. Stephen finally spoke. Why are you doing this? The question wasn't aggressive. It wasn't defensive. It was curious. Mark blinked. Excuse me? Why are you humiliating me? Stephen asked calmly, instead of simply asking who I am. A few employees exchanged glances. Mark laughed, sharp and dismissive. Because I don't need to, he said. I can tell everything I need to know just by looking at you. That sentence landed. Some people felt it in their stomachs. Others felt relief that it wasn't directed at them. Stephen nodded slowly. So that's how decisions are made here now, he said. By appearance. Mark's smile faded. You're not here to give feedback, he snapped. You're here without permission. He turned to the guards. Remove him? The guards hesitated, not because they doubted Mark, but because something about Stephen didn't fit the role they'd assigned him. One guard cleared his throat. Sir, he said quietly, maybe we should just escort him out calmly. Mark turned on him instantly. Did I ask for your opinion? He hissed. The guard stiffened. No, sir. Then do your job. Power had spoken. The guards stepped closer. Phones came out. Someone in the back whispered, This is getting uncomfortable. Stephen looked around the lobby. Faces everywhere. Fear, curiosity, indifference, no courage. He raised his voice slightly, just enough to be heard. Does anyone here believe this is how leadership should look? Silence. That silence answered everything. Mark smiled again. See, he said. No one agrees with you? Stephen met his eyes. No, he replied softly. They're just afraid of you. That cut deeper than Mark expected. His jaw tightened. You don't get to psychoanalyze me, Mark said. You don't belong here. Stephen took one step forward. The guards instinctively blocked him. Easy, one warned. Stephen stopped. I'm not your enemy, Stephen said, but your behavior will be. Mark laughed loudly. You hear this guy? He said to the crowd. Threatening us now? I'm not threatening, Stephen replied. I'm warning. That word echoed. Warning. Mark's face flushed. That's it, he barked. I'm done entertaining this. He pointed toward the exit. Throw him out. The guards reached for Stephen's arm, and for the first time, Stephen reacted. not with force, with disappointment. He gently pulled his arm back. "Don't touch me," he said calmly. The room froze. Something about his tone shifted. It wasn't authority, it was certainty. One guard hesitated again. "Sir, please don't make this worse," he whispered. Stephen looked at him. "This already is worse," he replied. "For all of you." Mark stepped closer, invading Stephen's space. "You think you're special?" Mark sneered. "You think you matter here?" Stephen looked him straight in the eye. "I know I do." A murmur spread through the crowd. Mark felt control slipping and panicked. When people panic, they escalate. "Security," he shouted louder now. "Call the police if you have to." That crossed a line. A woman near the elevators gasped. Someone muttered, "This is too much." Stephen closed his eyes briefly, not in fear, in resolve. "This company was built to protect people," he said quietly, "not humiliate them." Mark scoffed. "You keep saying that like it means something." Stephen opened his eyes. "It will," he said. Outside, engines hummed. Footsteps approached the entrance. Inside, Mark stood confident, convinced he had won. He didn't know yet. This wasn't the climax. This was the moment right before everything collapsed. The lobby had stopped pretending. No one was working now. No one was walking past. Every eye was fixed on the same scene. Stephen standing calmly near the entrance, Mark Reynolds gripping authority like a weapon, and security frozen in between. Time felt stretched. Mark broke the silence first. "You're still standing here," he said mockingly. "That's impressive. Most people leave by now." Stephen didn't respond. That silence wasn't weakness anymore. It was pressure. Mark felt it and hated it. "Look around you," Mark continued, gesturing broadly. "Everyone here followed the rules. They earned their place." Stephen finally spoke. "Did they?" he asked. "Or did they just learn to stay quiet?" A ripple moved through the crowd. Someone shifted their weight. Someone swallowed hard. Mark's smile tightened. "You think you're exposing something?" he snapped. "This is how the real world works." Stephen nodded slowly. "That's what people say," he replied, "right before systems collapse." That word again. Collapse. Mark scoffed. "You really think you have any power here?" Stephen looked past him, not at the guards, not at the employees, but at the building itself. "I already used my power," he said quietly, "when I built this place." A murmur spread. Mark waved it off. "Enough," he snapped. "Escort him out. Now." The guards hesitated again, this time longer. Because something had shifted. The crowd wasn't laughing anymore. They weren't entertained. They were uncomfortable. One guard leaned closer to Stephen and whispered, "Sir, please just go. This won't end well." Stephen met his eyes. "It already won't," he replied, "but not for me." That sentence landed like a stone in water. The guard straightened, conflicted. Mark noticed. "What's the problem?" he barked. "Do you need instructions written down?" The guard swallowed. "No, sir." But his hands didn't move. Mark's voice rose. "Move!" The guard reached out and then stopped. "I'm not touching him," he said quietly. The lobby froze. Mark stared at him. "What did you say?" "I said I'm not touching him," the guard repeated. "He hasn't done anything wrong." A collective breath was held. Mark felt something he hadn't felt in years. Resistance. "You're insubordinate," Mark snapped. "I can replace you in a day." The guard nodded. "I know." That was it, the moment. Something cracked. A woman near reception spoke up, her voice shaking. "He's right," she said. "He hasn't done anything." Heads turned. Mark glared. "Stay out of this." Another voice followed. "This is getting embarrassing," someone muttered. Mark spun around. "Who said that?" No answer. But the silence had changed. It wasn't fear anymore. It was judgment. Stephen watched quietly as the room turned. This was never about him. It was about who people chose to be when authority stopped being absolute. Mark took a step back, recalibrating. "You're all forgetting something," he said sharply. "I'm in charge here." Stephen finally stepped forward again. This time, no one blocked him. "Being in charge," Stephen said calmly, "is not the same as being right." Mark laughed, but it sounded hollow. "You still don't get it," he said. "You're nothing here." Stephen tilted his head slightly. "Then why are you trying so hard to prove it?" That hit harder than shouting ever could. Mark's face flushed. He checked his watch. A nervous habit. Outside, a black executive car slowed to a stop. Inside, Stephen spoke one final time before the truth arrived. "I came here today to see what this company had become," he said. "I got my answer." Mark crossed his arms. "And what's that?" Stephen looked around the lobby. at the guards, the staff, the executives hiding behind glass walls. That power without accountability always exposes itself, he replied. The front doors slid open. Footsteps echoed. Voices, urgent, respectful. Mark turned instinctively. His confidence faltered, because for the first time since this began, he wasn't the most important person in the room anymore, and everyone felt it. The automatic doors slid open slowly, not dramatically, not loudly, but every sound in the lobby stopped anyway. 3 people entered. Sharp suits, calm expressions, deliberate steps. The kind of people who didn't need to raise their voices because authority followed them naturally. Behind them, a black executive car idled outside. Stephen didn't turn around. He didn't need to. Mark Reynolds did. The moment Mark saw them, something in his posture changed. His shoulders stiffened. His confident stance softened, just slightly, but enough to notice. One of the men spoke first. "Apologies for the delay," he said, scanning the lobby. Traffic was heavier than expected. Then his eyes landed on Stephen, and everything changed. He stopped walking. His face shifted. Surprise, then respect, then urgency. "Mr. Seagal," he said quickly, "I'm sorry you had to wait." The words echoed through the lobby. "Mr. Seagal." The room froze. Mark blinked. Once. Twice. He laughed nervously. "I'm sorry," Mark said, forcing a smile. "I think there's been a misunderstanding." The executive didn't look at him. He walked straight past Mark and stood beside Stephen. "This is unacceptable," he said quietly, but not softly. "Why is our founder standing near the exit?" "Founder." The word dropped like glass. Someone gasped. A phone slipped from someone's hand. Mark's mouth opened and then closed. That's not possible," he stammered. "I would know." The second executive finally looked at Mark. "You should," she said calmly. "He owns 51% of this company." Silence exploded. Faces drained of color. Eyes widened. Breaths caught halfway. Mark felt the floor tilt beneath him. He turned slowly toward Stephen, the man he had mocked, threatened, ordered removed. Stephen Seagal, the owner. Mark swallowed hard. I didn't know," he said quickly. "If I had known..." Stephen finally turned to face him. His expression hadn't changed. That was the most terrifying part. "You didn't know who I was," Stephen said calmly, "but you showed everyone who you are." Mark's lips trembled. "I was just following procedure," he said weakly. "We have rules." Stephen raised a hand. The room obeyed the gesture instantly. "Rules are meant to protect people," Stephen said, "not to humiliate them." Mark tried again. "You should have identified yourself," he blurted. "This could have been avoided." Stephen nodded slowly. "Yes," he replied. "It could have." He took one step closer. "But then I wouldn't have seen the truth." That sentence crushed what little confidence Mark had left. Stephen turned to the executives. "Is this how you want leadership to behave when no one important is watching?" The first executive lowered his eyes. "No, sir." Stephen looked around the lobby, at the guards, the receptionist, the employees who had stayed silent. "This didn't happen because of one man," Stephen said evenly. "It happened because everyone learned it was safer to say nothing." The room felt exposed. Mark's voice cracked. "Please," he said quietly. "I worked hard for this position." Stephen met his eyes. "So did everyone you humiliated today," he replied. He turned back to the executives. "Effective immediately," Stephen said. "I want a full review of leadership conduct." Mark inhaled sharply. The second executive spoke. "Mark Reynolds," she said, "you're suspended pending investigation." "Suspended." Mark staggered slightly. "But," he began. "Security," the first executive said calmly. "Please escort Mr. Reynolds out." The irony hit the room all at once. The same guards, the same exit, different man. The guards hesitated, then complied. Mark looked back once, desperation in his eyes. Stephen didn't look at him. Not out of cruelty, out of closure. As Mark was escorted away, Stephen turned toward the lobby one last time. "Power reveals character," he said calmly, "and today, this building revealed a lot." No one spoke. They couldn't. Stephen adjusted his jacket and walked toward the elevators, not as a victim, not as a hero, but as a reminder. That respect should never depend on recognition. And the most dangerous test of leadership is how you treat people when you think they don't matter. The lobby didn't return to normal after Mark Reynolds was escorted out. It couldn't. Something fundamental had shifted, not just in leadership, but in how people stood, breathed, and looked at one another. Conversations didn't restart. Phones stayed lowered. No one rushed to desks. They were waiting. Stephen stood near the center of the lobby now, not elevated, not dramatic, just present. The executives gathered around him instinctively, creating space without being asked. "Clear the floor," Stephen said calmly. "I want to speak to everyone." No shouting, no authority flex, yet everyone listened. Security quietly ensured no one left. Employees from nearby offices drifted in, sensing something rare was happening, a moment that would be remembered. Stephen looked around. Some faces were pale, some ashamed, some relieved. This company, Stephen began, wasn't built on intimidation. His voice was steady, measured. It was built by people who were once ignored, underestimated, and told they didn't belong. He paused. "I walked in today looking like one of those people." The words landed heavily. A few heads lowered. Stephen turned slightly toward the guard who had refused to touch him earlier. "You," he said. The guard stiffened. "Yes, sir." "What's your name?" "Daniel," he replied. Stephen nodded. "You chose integrity over instructions," Stephen said. "That choice matters." Daniel swallowed hard. "Thank you, sir." Stephen turned to the receptionist. "You followed procedure," he said, not accusing, not excusing. "But procedure without judgment becomes cruelty." Her eyes filled with tears. "I'm sorry," she whispered. Stephen nodded. "So am I," he replied. He addressed the executives next. "This didn't happen overnight," Stephen said. "Cultures like this grow when results are rewarded and behavior is ignored." The first executive spoke carefully. "You're right," he said. "We failed to monitor leadership conduct." Stephen met his gaze. "Then fix it," he replied, "starting today." He took a breath. "Effective immediately," Stephen continued. "All leadership roles are under review, not for performance metrics, but for how people are treated." A murmur spread. Stephen raised a hand slightly. "This is not a witch hunt," he said. "This is accountability." He turned toward Daniel again. "Daniel," Stephen said, "you didn't just stop an injustice, you exposed one." Daniel looked stunned. Stephen addressed the executives. "Promote him to head of security operations," Stephen said. "Effective today." Gasps rippled. Daniel's eyes widened. "Sir, Stephen held up a hand. "Leadership begins when someone says no to the wrong order," he said. "You did." Stephen then turned to an older woman standing quietly near the edge of the crowd, someone most people had ignored. She had spoken earlier, softly but bravely. "And you," Stephen said, meeting her eyes. She froze. "Yes?" "You reminded this room that silence isn't neutral," Stephen said. "I want you leading the internal ethics committee." Her hands trembled. "I've never—" "You already did," Stephen replied. "You spoke when it mattered." The executives nodded, taking notes. Stephen looked around one last time. "Let me be very clear," he said. "If anyone here believes respect should depend on titles, clothes, or perceived importance," he paused. "This company is not for you." Silence. Not fearful this time, respectful. Stephen turned toward the elevators. One executive asked softly, "Sir, will you be visiting more often?" Stephen smiled faintly. "I shouldn't have to," he said, "if leadership is doing its job." As the elevator doors opened, employees stepped aside instinctively, not because he owned the company, but because he had reminded them what power was supposed to look like. The doors closed, and in the lobby he left behind, something rare remained: accountability, awareness, and the quiet understanding that dignity was no longer optional. The lobby eventually emptied. Desks were reclaimed, screens lit up again. The building returned to movement. But nothing inside it was the same. People spoke more softly now. They listened longer. They watched themselves and each other. Because once power is exposed, it can never pretend again. Steven Seagal didn't give a speech that day. He didn't call a press conference. He didn't announce changes on social media. He simply left behind a standard, and standards are heavier than punishments. In the days that followed, word spread quietly through Seagal Industries. Managers started knocking before entering rooms. Security stopped assuming guilt. Executives asked questions they'd never asked before, not because they feared Stephen, but because they understood him. They understood that real authority doesn't come from a title. It comes from accountability. Stephen returned to his routine. No spotlight, no victory lap. Oh, that was always his way, because the point was never to prove who he was. The point was to see who everyone else chose to be when they thought no one important was watching. And that is the test we all face every day, not in boardrooms, not in glass buildings, but in small moments, the stranger we ignore, the voice we silence, the power we misuse because we think it belongs to us. Stephen didn't walk into his company to be recognized. He walked in to remind people of something they had forgotten, that dignity should never be earned by appearance, that respect should never depend on status, and that silence, when faced with injustice, is still a choice. The most dangerous people in the room aren't the loud ones. They're the ones who stay quiet while wrong things happen and call it professionalism. That day, one guard chose differently, one employee spoke up, and one man with power chose restraint over revenge. That's why the story matters. Not because a powerful man was disrespected, but because ordinary people were reminded that their choices matter too. You don't need to own a company to stop injustice. You don't need a title to show integrity. You only need courage in the moment it costs you something. Steven Seagal never fired everyone involved. He didn't destroy careers out of anger. He corrected a system, because humiliation teaches fear, but accountability teaches change. And change is louder than punishment. If this story made you uncomfortable, that's good. Discomfort is where growth begins. Ask yourself, how do I treat people who can do nothing for me? How do I speak when power isn't on my side? Who am I when no one important is watching? Because one day, without warning, you might be tested too. And when that moment comes, may you choose dignity over ego, respect over assumption, and courage over silence. Type respect if you believe everyone deserves dignity. Share this story with someone who needs the reminder, because real power is quiet.